another session of Expert Talks. Today we are joined by Manpreet Singh, President of Indian Chamber of International Business. He's also Chairman of International Relations Committee at Maharashtra Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture for the last 3 years. Outside India, Manpreet Singh is the founder and president of the Georgia-India Joint Business Council. He's a very successful entrepreneur, business expert, and economic analyst. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Thomas, for having me here today. And a big thank you to Renaissance for listening to me.
So, sir, let's move on to the first question.
Of course, please go ahead.
According to several economic reports, India's merchandise exports increased to an all-time high of $421 billion in 2021-22. It has been around $300 billion for the past 10 years. And this means that in GDP terms, it is a 13.3% increase in the value of exports. Is this phenomenon of high exports a part of the after effect of pandemic, or is it because of the prevailing economic situation in the various parts of the world regarding inflation and all?
So Thomas, there are multiple aspects to this. So of course, the pandemic and the post-pandemic era created a lot of opportunities. But there is a little bit of downside to this also. Like, for example, what happened is you will find that merchandise exports went up, not manufacturers who were exporting. It was more like merchant traders and merchant exporters that majorly contributed to this figure. So that can be multiple reasons. One being that people with traditional businesses, with their businesses since a long time, they got disrupted. They had to close down. They had to change their various business lines. And that is the reason they went on to other products and servicing other markets. And it was a result of diversification. So that is one aspect of it. The second aspect is that, of course, the situation was the same around the world. So with China being majorly cut off because of the pandemic, the next logical option was India. So anybody who had any connections with India started to look at opportunities and buying from India. So that also contributed to this. The third aspect is very interesting. You mentioned about inflation. So India, the manufacturing industry was sitting on a lot of stocks because, traditionally we are used to having overstocking of our factories, of our homes and all these things. So we had a lot of raw materials, a lot of finished products, which were cheaper, which were bought before the pandemic, and we had stocks available with us. So when the whole world went from just in time to requiring stocks, India was the answer. They had the stocks in hand. So they said that just in time was not right for this time. So where we had low price purchases, low price stocks available with us, even when we got 10%, 5% extra margins from our existing revenues, we were more than happy to sell it to all over the world. So that also contributed to a certain extent to, I think, these figures that are there. And of course, we have our very own Prime Minister, who's our walking, talking brand ambassador, who creates the image of India to the rest of the world and says that, we are here for the world to satisfy their hunger for products and services.
Yes, so you are of the opinion that there are various factors which are leading to this exponential increase in the exports. And so what about the domestic economy, sir? What about the effects of this pandemic on the domestic businesses, domestic economy? How long do you think that it will affect, and what all are the things the Indian finance ministry can implement to get over this issue?
See, there are a lot of disruptions that happened, and people, as they knew their traditional businesses, that changed. So I know of a company that used to manufacture shoes, and they diversified because there were no orders for shoes. They started manufacturing PPE kits. So from a turnover of something like 2-3 crores, they went on to 40 crores, which they least expected. So which they've never been able to do. So, there were these lot of drastic changes. So people who got the right opportunity at the right time, who changed, who diversified, who looked for better opportunities with their existing machinery, with their existing capabilities, I think they were the ones who really made their mark. So that changed the domestic market completely. So there was a lot of demand for food and food products. I know a lot of women who started manufacturing cakes and biscuits in their homes, and this resulted in sales of chocolate raw materials, cake raw materials, and all these products phenomenally and exponentially. So, there were a lot of such products because the world was sitting at home, and this happened. So, domestic consumption also got built up. But when it comes to FMCG, food, and all these things, but when it came to like footwear, garments, furniture, people would just stop buying completely because the priorities changed. So these industries suffered quite a bit, I would say, and they were down to either 10%, 20% of their figures pre-pandemic, which was a huge difference. So many closed down also because not everybody was able to sustain that. Then what happened is just when pandemic opened up, you had the cases of revenge buying. You stayed in 1 year in pajamas and you wanted to finally wear a suit or go and attend that party. So there was this revenge buying phenomena of clothes, shoes, gadgets that also fueled because though you were not having major expenses. For those who were earning, because a decent population was earning also, the fintech industry, the banking industry, the FMCG industry, these were industries working, people were earning, but they had nothing to spend on. So that came down to that revenge consumption cycle. So right now, if you see that in the last 2 months, we are seeing revenge tourism, as we call it, because people have been sitting at home since 2 years. Now it's like left, right, and center. Let's just travel. People want to see the world. People want to see this country. So you have revenge tourism. So this is driving up. You can check the flight tickets. Bombay Delhi, for example, was 2,000, 3,000 rupees. It is now 10,000 rupees, whether you buy 15 days in advance or 15 hours in advance. So these are generating a lot of profits. But I think at some point of time, it might not be ethical too, but it is a debatable subject that, some say that, okay, we've not earned for 2 years, so now is our time to earn. Some say that, no, it is not right. There should be an upper limit. How will a poor man survive? But like I said, it's debatable at the end of the day.
Yes, sir. Regarding your point of, sitting at home and not spending much for 2 years, there is an economic point of view put forward by various economists and business people that the general population hasn't spent much due to the pandemic for the last 2 years. And the coming 2 years or 3 years, we can expect an increase in expenditure and which will reflect upon the GDP of the country. But the economists are of the view that GDP rate we shouldn't take much into very serious account, because soon after this revenge buying and revenge tourism or revenge travel is finished, the GDP rates will get back to its actual normal phase. So from a businessman point of view, how are you planning to balance of this?
So, Thomas, I'd like to give you some perspective. Okay, so like we are seeing that don't look at now, look at the future, ignore 2, 3 years, we'll see what happens. An economist is a person who looks at data and figures in his hand. But being a business person, we are in industry of manufacturing since decades now. It's a family business. So we've seen a lot of these cycles. For example, if you talk about the recession of 2008 and 9, I mean, the disruption it caused in the whole world. But I would say for my business, that was the best time of my business. We made so much profit that it covered up our losses of the previous 10 years. So this is very subjective. And every 5 to 7 years, you will find some disruption or the other that always comes. For example, very recently, we talk about demonetization, GST implementation, pandemic, recession. For now, we're getting the Russian and Ukraine war, and maybe another year and we'll have World War III, or maybe we'll have another pandemic. There will always be something or the other which will be a disruptive session. Yes, it used to happen once in 20 years, then it became once in 10 years, then once in 7.5 years, then 5 years. So maybe the cycle will become shorter, but it's always going to happen. So change is the only thing constant in life. That is what I believe in.
Yes, that point is very important and crucial also. So moving from the domestic economy and business, we will move on to the international trade. Recently, India and UAE agreed on a comprehensive economic partnership agreement in which UAE will phase out duties of almost 80% of the tariff lines. And it means that almost 90% of India's exports to UAE will be out of tariffs. This deal is expected to mainly help sectors such as textile, footwear, jewelry, and pharmaceuticals. This deal will also help India to reach its $1 trillion merchandise and service export target by 2030. As a president of Indian Chamber of International Business, how much do you think this deal and similar deals with other countries will help India accelerate its growth?
Well, I think honestly, the world is moving to more and more treaties and arrangements and preferred tariffs. So earlier we had just the WTO, which was basically one country stopping the other from accessing their markets in one way or the other, and with having indirect subsidies or indirect obstructions. So that is what it was, and India also suffered because of the WTO rules at some point of time. And then we as Indians always find a way out for everything. So things happened and things changed. So less said the better. But that's how the world moves. And when you talk about these treaties and agreements, what happens is there are always ways to circumvent, bypass, but that is a very nominal kind of a thing. Overall, it always gives a better perspective and openness to trade. Like India and UAE have traditionally always had amazing trade relations. And of course, there was duty, but then over a period of time, there was VAT added in UAE, that they were thinking of income tax. So things became a little complicated, paperwork started and all that. So when it happens between India and UAE trade, it was already pretty high, especially when it comes to Mumbai and UAE. These are natural partners. I don't know any business that operates on an international level who doesn't operate out of UAE too, especially when it comes to businesses in Mumbai. So because that's a natural partner, 2-hour flight is cheap, closer to UAE from Mumbai than Delhi sometimes. So that is the thing that you have to understand. And UAE has been very open to the rest of the world with free trade zones, free agreements, access to capital, access to products, and a natural partner was for Africa. Like Africa was the largest trading partner of India at some point of time, but most of this was indirect through UAE for various reasons, for capital reasons, for control reasons, or foreign exchange regulations. So they used to export to UAE. The person from the Africa used to come with cash there. They used to buy the products and they go. So who was benefiting? A third party was benefiting. Now with such treaties, what happens is the actual Indian producer or a service provider benefits from this. Let it be imports, let it be exports. See, for any treaty, you have to understand that it has both ways implications. If you are removing duties on one side, you are removing duties on the other side also. But UAE majorly has been a service-oriented country, not so much of a manufacturing. Right now, they're focusing on technology, they're focusing on startups, they're focusing on mobile vehicles and flying cars and healthcare by drones. So this is what they are focusing on. Whereas we are focusing on roti, kapda, makan, sad to say, but somebody needs to do that also. So I think there is a balance that we need to learn from such countries. And instead of just sticking to that 2%, 5% margins, and you look at the manufacturing industry or the service industry, we need to have more of a value addition. And that is what we should learn from such treaties. And that is what we have to implement in our level also. So yes, we are targeting at $100 billion of trade between India and UAE. And that also because what is happening, the UAE itself is becoming a bit consumer, not more of a transshipment hub, because their populations are going up. There are a lot of Indian populations or Asian populations that are settling in UAE. It has become one of the challenges to Singapore, a challenge to a lot of other hubs of the region. So the consumption, domestic consumption is also going up. So when you talk about SEPA, it is a great opportunity for Indian companies to expand to the rest of the world from the UAE, and UAE companies to enter into India for investment. See, they have very cheap capital and they don't know what to do that with that. And we have a huge consumer base. And this one thing I want to point out, whenever any foreign company comes to India, they say, oh, 1.3 billion people, and we'll sell off everything. But they need to realize that the 1.3 billion is not their consumer. The consumer is, there are two parts, mass consumption and premium consumption. So 1% of your population is the kind of population that will buy out anything and everything for exclusivity at whatever the price. But when you talk about mass market, well, price is the only criteria. Quality is a given that you have to have. So how do you compete with, for example, Bikaji Bhujia or something like that with a PepsiCo company coming out of USA? Just an example. But so you need to understand which segment you are targeting. Because if you want to sell to the mass market, you have to make it in India, because you cannot make it in USA or Europe and ended up selling it here, because you will not get the mass market then, because you are not competitive. As simple as that. We are cheaper in terms of labor, we're cheaper in terms of products, we're cheaper in terms of sourcing, we're cheaper in terms of distribution. So these are the things that you have to keep in mind. So yes, SEPA will definitely balance out trade. It will increase trade, and I'm sure that 100 billion is very easy to surpass.
Yes, sir. So now moving on from the West Asia to Russia, Ukraine. A few days ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Russia's trade with BRICS countries, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa, has exponentially increased since the beginning of the Russian-Ukraine war. He quoted the figure of 38% increase. 38% is the growth. He also mentioned how India and China are ramping up the purchase of Russian oil for the domestic use. During the conversation with the media people, he also mentioned that deliberations are happening regarding opening Indian retail store in Russia on a large scale. What do you think are the possibilities of opportunities for Indian businesses to expand and thrive in Russia and similarly in other East European nations?
Honestly speaking, there is huge opportunity. If you talk about specifically the situation because of the war, well, if for example you have a product to sell, let's say we are India, we want to sell a product, we've been traditionally selling it to Bangladesh. Example. Suddenly Bangladesh decides that, okay, we are not going to buy from India anymore, we're going to make it on our own. What do? You're still making it. So you will decide that, okay, it's time to go to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka says, no, you go to another country. So a person who has to sell a product will do whatever he has to do to sell his products. This is the basic nature of any trade, domestic, international. You make a product, you have to sell a product, and you have to make a profit out of it. So when you talk about Russia, maximum Russia's consumption used to be fed out of either European products, Chinese products, or the countries, the CIS region. So what happened was, because of this war, Europe got cut off. They said, okay, we are not going to buy Russian products. That's point number one. China, being a natural partner and a neighbor, the logistics costs are very high. So that became a little difficult because the train is coming and everything. They have their own ways and means. But it was not very easy because China is not that cheap when it comes to land transport. Okay, yes, the products might be cheaper to a certain extent, but China is facing problems of their own. They have their own lockdowns. They are having their own shortages. So China was also not able to fill that gap. India-Russia relations are, I would say, centuries old, not only decades old. So we've been working together since eternity. So India became a natural partner, a huge population as a consumer base also, and as a manufacturing base also. So food is the first thing that comes when it comes to security of a country, which is at war. The moment they say that, okay, you're not going to be getting European products, you're not going to be easily sourcing Chinese products, okay, you open up the CIS route, you open up the air route to India, you open up the sea route to India, and India gets a huge opportunity. Now, looking at the Russian perspective, yes, everything becomes expensive. So, if, for example, a product is coming out of South America, for example, Brazil, and going to Russia, and it is coming from India and going to Russia, you're not uncompetitive anymore as an Indian company. Because A, the freight is higher when it comes to Brazil, the product may or may not be cheaper, but then you become automatically competitive because of the situation. So that advantage India has got. And I think it is now or never. We really need to cash on this. And you mentioned about the Indian stores being opening up. Yes, a lot is being done. Our chamber itself is in touch with a lot of Russian agencies and the organizations there, supermarkets, hypermarkets. We are trying to push Indian products to the Russian market. So yes, that's an ongoing process. We need to see how the payments will work, how the shipments will work, because there's no insurance when you're shipping to Russia. There's no transit route, which is shorter, which used to be open earlier. But yes, opportunity-wise, yes, definitely. And there's another saying, they say that higher the risk, higher the returns. So, and I'm sure that Indians and Indian manufacturing and service providers are experts at that. We look at opportunities, we find our way out, and we are good at jugaad anyway, so we'll find a way.
Yes, sir. You said about shipment and the logistics of the trade. A few days ago, there was a news report that the north-south corridor between Russia and India through Iran and Afghanistan has done a trial of a train shipment from Russia to India. And similarly, Vladivostok-Chennai corridor, which is part of the India-Russia trade deal, is also, the work is progressing at heavy speed. So these two projects, North-South corridor and Vladivostok-Chennai corridor, how do you think these two projects will help India and Russia to bilaterally increase the volume, not just value, the volume of trade?
See, there are two aspects to this. One is access to a trade route, and second is that trade route being profitable. So these are the two things that for a trade and a business opportunity, for a buyer and seller to transact, it has to be economical. So a route being open does not mean that it will be the preferred route. That is one thing that you have to know. For example, when you talk about India-Iran trade or India-Afghanistan trade, one route has been through the Chabahar port, which is exempt from sanctions because it is under Indian control. And the second is Bandar Abbas, which is under sanctions and all these things. But 80% of the trade still uses Bandar Abbas port. So irrespective of that, and no sanctions, no this, no that, and one is under sanctions and is allowed because the ships available are not so much when it comes to the Chabahar route, which is what they are proposing for the North-South corridor, by the way. So it is going to come through Afghanistan all the way right up to Iran, through Chabahar and to Mumbai. So that is one proposed route. And the second, you are mentioning all the Vladivostok one. So Vladivostok has an advantage when it comes to Indian people visiting. We don't need a visa also, or it is an e-visa. So it's not the traditional visa for Russia. So the travel becomes very easy when somebody needs to go from one place to the other. Because visa is one of the largest hindrances when you want to have trade access. So where Vladivostok has that advantage over the rest of the Russia. So this is one thing when you say that, okay, the trade has potential to increase. But after you get an order, for example, you need to come and execute that, and then you need a trade route. So then you see that, okay, then which is viable. So for all you know, while we're talking about it, the air route might open up, and then it might transit through by air. It might be cheaper to send the products through air, the volumetric ones, of course, not the heavy, bulky ones. But air might turn out to be cheaper corridor. So it all depends on the kind of cargo you have, the kind of volume you have. But yes, you're opening up air, you're opening up North-South corridor, you're opening up Vladivostok. So the volume will definitely increase. The opportunities will definitely increase. And we need a market that pays us well. And we don't need to find for 1 cent or 2 cents when it comes to Europe or US. And we are getting a much better margin when it comes to supplying to Russia and CIS. So that is definitely going to be a bigger trade volume.
Now, moving on from Russia to India and China. India and China have very strong and deep-rooted trade relations, both as neighbors and also power players in this Asian region. Since the beginning of the pandemic and then the border issues between India and China, Chinese trade with India has increased to huge levels, despite economic measures by the Indian government. What does this denote? Or in other words, how much important it is for both the nations economically and business-wise to avoid border issues or another issues get into the trade relations?
First, we have to understand that any country's national integrity is the most important thing. The trade comes later on. I'll give you the example of trade between India and Pakistan. Northern part of India used to benefit hugely by Pakistani cement coming because it was a better quality cement at a cheaper rate. So India's infrastructure was benefiting quite a bit because of that. But because of certain issues which you are also aware, we decided that no, we are going to be stopping the imports and we are going to be not making it that easy for them to access our market because our capital was going there. So you have to understand, we did not stop their imports, we stopped our imports from their country. And we did not stop, we just put a duty on it. So if you still want to do it, you are allowed to do it, but it is up to you whether you want to pay a 200% duty on anything. So it's as WTO rules and other rules. So less said the better. So that is what happens. So when it comes to national integrity, yes, nation first. But today we are so interdependent on each other because what happens is India is a huge consumer base, China is a cheaper production base, and we have a mass population. So you have to understand this aspect. This is point number one. Point number two is when it comes to high precision products, high engineering products like train wagons, metro wagons, aircraft parts, power stations, raw materials and parts. So these are the products that we can either get it, for example, from Germany or from America or from China. So we have to import these because these are huge volumes. Even if we save average of 20 to 25%, it is our hard-earned country's foreign exchange that we are saving by importing from China. So that is also in national interest. And what happens is, at the end of the day, these multifaceted, it is a question of a balance. So you stop products which are non-essential, but you do not stop products which are essential for the growth of your country, your nation, and your stability. So yes, I would never want to import, for example, shoes and clothes from China, but I will be more open to get trains, wagons, rockets, nuclear power plants from China, because that helps me develop my own ecosystem, my own infrastructure, and make my country stronger. So that's the balance you need to strike.
Okay, so moving on to our last question. It's not actually a question. I know many young people who are waiting to be young entrepreneurs in various fields, such as service sectors, manufacturing sectors, production sectors, etc. So as a successful entrepreneur, businessman who is into business of footwear, manufacturing and business, what are your advices for the young generation who are aspiring to be an entrepreneur?
Two things that you need to keep in mind when you want to be an entrepreneur. First, don't be afraid to try things. You know, people might tell you, "Arey, ye to nahi chalega, this might not work, and there are hundreds of products like this. Why you want to do this and why you want to do that?" Don't worry, listen to everybody, take everybody's advice, but do what your heart says is for you and what is right. That is the first thing that you have to say. Second thing, don't be afraid to fail, because you will definitely fail at one point of time or the other. Definitely. There's nothing wrong in that. You know, that's what is called trial and error. Only when you make a mistake, you will realize that not to do this the next time. And only when you make a failure, you cross that out and you go on to the next. That helps you grow. So failure, like we've always heard, is a stepping stone to success. We have to remember this. You know, it is not a saying, it is a well tried and tested formula. And not only when it comes to different businesses, but even in the same business, if you say, you know, you just started something, you realize that something is not working out, one process is not working out, you change it. You failed in one way, but you change it and develop. Don't be afraid to say that, okay, nahi, I failed, now what I'm going to do, I can't do this anymore, let me go back to what I was doing. Doesn't matter, you know, it is an evolving process. So failure, you shouldn't be afraid. And you shouldn't be afraid to experiment, because these are the two things that really go a long way. And listen, always ready to listen. But there is a hard stop that you need to have for yourself, that you have to realize, you know, because going ahead in life also means knowing when to stop. So, for example, if you failed 100 times, boss, forget it, this is not for you, go back to doing a job. But yes, you failed 2-3 times, you've changed the process, you're getting better. You've improved slightly, even if it is 1%. That's fine, because you've changed something, you've gotten better. So even if you're getting 1% better, that 100 times failure is worth it, because you're 100 times better at the end of it. But if you're going down the scale, that is the time when you need to think that either you need to change things you're doing or change the things that you do.
Thank you, sir, for your time. It has been wonderful talking to you, hearing your opinions and thoughts regarding various subjects, both domestic trade, business, international trade, business, economy, and at the end, an advice to young people who are going to watch this interview through YouTube and various social platforms. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Thomas, and thank you to the Renaissance for having me here today. It's a pleasure.